So we're going to look at the hamstring muscle and how that stretches in 3 dimensions. The hamstring is a multi-dimensional muscle. I'm not sure we really know its full capacity, but what we do know is it's very injured, very susceptible to injury, and so we need to, maybe we're just not stretching it as well as we could, maybe we're not mobilising it as well as we could, and there are more ways of doing it that I'm going to show you right now. But what I'm going to look at is there's 2 ways of stretching, with a straight leg that we're all aware of, and also with a bent leg, which we're kind of less aware of. I'm going to first go through the straight leg in 3 planes of motion, and then through the bent leg. When we look at the sagittal plane stretches in the hamstring, we're quite used to seeing this kind of stretch carried out by runners, or the leg up on a stool, for example. And what that's happening there is we've got hip flexion, and with a straight knee straight, hip flexion is the thing that stretches and pulls this hamstring up over the backside. So we need to make sure that we can target that. One thing that's important with stretching and stretching couples is that the hip flexion needs to be coupled in the sagittal plane with ankle dorsiflexion because of the role it has in walking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be stepping backwards on my right leg to stretch my left hamstring. So dorsiflexing the ankle and then adding some hip flexion. And so my hip flexion will just reach forward. If I can't reach forward that far, I'm going to start up here and work my way down until I can find my toes. The dorsiflexion is really important in this movement. As opposed to just keeping the foot flat, we get a totally different stretch. Just with the upper body there, I can just increase my upper body dimensions a little bit by rotating, challenging the hamstring to control these wayward movements of the upper body. Does it look much like a stretch? Well, I can tell you that it is. Now we can look at the frontal plane. In the frontal plane we want the same thing. I need to keep the knee straight, hip flexion, but this time it's not dorsiflexion we're looking for, but kind of ankle inversion, which is where the sole of the foot, or the foot kind of supinates. Just come over here a little bit. By stepping this way, I get frontal plane distance between the 2 attachments, origin and insertion of the hamstrings. All of them, biceps femoris and the semi-tendinosus and membranosus muscles. And notice how the foot naturally inverts or supinates. Now all I need to do is to increase the hip flexion by reaching with my hands. If I reach forward, I'm getting hip flexion. I'm not so much targeting the hamstring as I start to move closer here. And the classic hamstring game is to try and touch your toes. And as we said before, it's not about isolating the hamstring here, it's about knowing the group of muscles with which the hamstring works. So we're mobilising and stretching the perineal muscles, the hamstring muscles, the glute muscles, the lats on the opposite side, QL, everything's being moved around. And then we'll look at the transverse plane muscle. The transverse plane of the hamstring still involves some hip flexion, but also is, because of where they're attached on the pelvis, some rotation, attaching to the ischium, some rotation of the pelvis, will also target the hamstring muscles. One way I'm going to do this is to put my weight predominantly on one leg. So I'm on the left leg, and I'm just going to start with a gentle reach round at hip height, all the way on my left leg, so I could be one-legged. And what is happening here is this is creating a transverse torsional stretch on my hamstring. So, knees straight. And get a little bit lower. So now I can start to incorporate the hip flexion. And I can challenge that as well by driving my opposite leg to different points. So the difference with a traditional stretch is that the hamstring is supposed to be stretched when the leg is straight, but I'm going to show you that it can be stretched relatively when the knee is bent as well, and that all depends on the speed of flexion of the hip relative to the speed of flexion of the knee. So in the sagittal plane, for example, we can challenge it by doing a lunge. So we're lunging forward, and the way I get increased speed through the hip flexion is to reaching forward. So the speed and range of movement of my knee is far less than the range of movement of my hip. So now, in the sagittal plane purely, I'm stretching my hamstring. Many people think a lunge is a quad exercise. In motion I beg to differ. Okay, so I can challenge it now, coming left, right hand, forward, around the clock. I'm really challenging my hamstring's ability to control these wayward motions of the upper body. Put a weight in there. 10 kilos weight and your hamstring will know about it, I guarantee. Very similar in that I want to get flexion at the knee and a quicker flexion of the hip. So in the frontal plane, I'm just going to challenge it. Little bend, reaching forward. Again, the range of my hip is far greater than the range of my knee. The speed of motion is far greater at the hip than in my knee, which means in this frontal plane, both medial and lateral hamstrings are being challenged here. This similar exercise puts a more transversely feel and challenges stability somewhat more. Again, in the transverse plane, with a very similar exercise. So what I'm going to do is the same exercise that I did for the straight leg, which was this. I'm going to bend the knee. And bending the knee increases the length of both ends of the muscle, increases the eccentric load, and gradually increase hip flexion to really challenge the muscles, properties and potential.